So a very, very warm welcome to all our viewers. We have an absolute power-packed panel of four extremely accomplished women leaders who I would be introducing one after the other. I'm sure you've had till now a captivating, time over the various marquee panels that have, held your breath. But let me now begin by introducing our panel here today. We are here as a panel to discuss, can women wish biases away? So that is the subject of what we're going to speak about. And I'm going to begin by introducing Gopi. So Gopi has nearly 20 years of hardcore technical experience. Currently, she is the associate director and heads the banking and financial services, as well as the asset finance function for Macquarie Group. And that is an extremely senior and responsible position. She is a computer engineer from BIT Mesra. She began her career, with TCS, having worked there for several years, worked with RBS, and now nearly for a decade, she's been with Macquarie. There are a bunch of things, and that's not just all about her. There are a bunch of things that Gopi loves to do, including philanthropic work. Very, very notable amongst which is that she mentors and helps, children and students from the more marginalized sections of society with their international education. I'm going to keep each of your introductions a little brief because, all of you have such power-packed resumes that if I were to just talk about each one of you, we might just end up eating a lot of time. So Gopi, if that's fine with you, I'm going to move to Nidhi.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to Nidhi. Nidhi is the HR director for India as well as South Asia. She is the chief human resource officer for UiPath. She has also above 20 years of experience. So in the same bracket as Gopi, the difference being she is an HR professional, right? With Gopi being from the business side. So a bunch of interests Nidhi has. She has a husband. She is very fond of her 7-year-old son. She has two furries at home. I'm sure, those are things that Nidhi would definitely love to speak about at other points in time. But, outside of that, she's, worked across emerging markets in Europe, in the United States, in Asia Pacific, and for the moment, she's based out of Bangalore. So that's a bit about Nidhi. She loves to cook. She loves to paint. She writes poems. And on top of that, she also plays basketball and table tennis. So I'm presuming, Nidhi, that you must be fairly tall. We can't see you, but that's great. I, of course, given my height, could have never played basketball, but it's great to know that you do, as well as table tennis. So welcome to the show, Nidhi. I hope we'll have a great time. Yeah. Moving on to Shayantani. She is the director with Judge Group and is responsible for organizational development. She's a bunch of things, okay? So she's a dean, she's a writer, she's a facilitator, she's a coach, she's a mindfulness expert, and she juggles or manages to very successfully juggle all these roles. But I think all of this, and amidst all of this, her core is her passion for design capability, building interventions, creating transformational learning for organizations through innovative technologies. So I guess even though she's also in HR and OD, the fact remains today we cannot run away from technology. So no matter what interventions we do, including the show that we are bringing to you, it is virtual, and therefore it is being brought to you on the basis of technology. So Shayantani, thank you very much. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And finally, Vijaya, we come to you. Vijaya has the most number of years of experience that probably is there on this panel. More than 23 years. If some of you have more, well, please pardon me. But Vijaya has really loads of experience. She is currently with Walmart Global Tech. So like Gopi, she's also a technology leader. She has, again, lots and lots of experience, having worked with the TVS Group, having started her career with Tata International, and then almost 14 years, at a stretch, beginning with what was then called Hewitt Associates, then it became Aon, and I think then that business got bought over by Wipro. So in a sense, 14 continuous long years, and the fact that she continued to lead what she did across those three organizations is testimony to the fact that obviously she was amongst the very best, because otherwise when you go through mergers and acquisitions, not always do you sort of end up keeping your job. She's also a computer engineering graduate from Bharatidasan University, again, a premier engineering college of India. And, for now, she is ensuring that all of Walmart's customers are satisfied, which I'm sure is no mean achievement. Sitting out of Chennai, all worldwide customers of Walmart being kept happy is no mean achievement at all. So welcome to the show, Vijaya.
Thank you, Aniruddha. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I think since the topic is, can women wish biases away? One of the things is, I'm not say who, but one of the panelists in her comment to me said it's like an ostrich, and I thought that was a wonderful comment, because it's the reality of life. When I started my HR career way back in 1992, at that point of time, and that was, by the way, with an engineering organization, Siemens. At that time also, we said that, there aren't enough women leaders, and, why aren't there enough women? And in 2021, we are still talking about the same thing. So the truth of the matter is, this is a very, very real issue. So I'm just going to focus on the word bias, and I'll come to each one of you. If each one of you could briefly tell me what has been your approach of dealing with bias. So, we can start with anyone. Maybe Vijaya, since I introduced you last, I should begin with you.
Sure, Aniruddha. Thank you. So one can be biased about anything, right? It's not just the gender, race, or age, but also things like communication style or their personal choices, interests, etc. Right? So when we start to be more self-aware and bring these biases to greater awareness, we are better able to create more inclusive cultures where individuals feel they can be themselves at work and more fully engage as part of their teams. So here is how I would self-check on unconscious bias when I deal with situations. Whenever I take key decisions, I kind of involve my team, right? So basically brainstorm with the team. I also strongly encourage them to challenge the decisions, right? So this helps in getting different perspectives and also help to form a stance that has consideration of all aspects. And listening is key, and weighing every input without discarding them becomes even more important. So that's my view, and it's actually working well, right? So once you start getting the multiple perspectives, our thought process also get tuned to consider all the aspects around us before taking a decision.
Thank you, Vijaya. I'm going to do a switch. So we've had the so-called, it's a technologist's view. I'm going to come to Nidhi and see whether the HR thinks any differently. What's been your approach of dealing with bias?
So like Vijaya said, I think biases exist and the unconscious bias is just there to stay. It's more important for us to always, I think the way I've approached is always assuming intent to begin with, being a listener, being an observer, and actually showing up in the arena like Brené speaks of, without any vengeance or any guilt. So you speak, you are more focused on your self-care, you're more supportive to people, you are open to listening, you bring diverse points of view, you allow allowance to occur on your teams. I think that's the way it has worked for me all throughout my career. It has also been very important for me to kind of be an advocate for people or team members who cannot speak for
Oh,
themselves.
sorry, Nidhi is back.
So I was saying, I think it's also very critical for us as leaders to speak for those who cannot stand for themselves and make their voice be heard. So I always tell my team members in the people function, a director or a senior VP can always stand for themselves and ask and demand for what they need. But I think as people leaders, it's our role and responsibility to speak for someone on the grassroots level, on the floor, who doesn't have a voice or is perhaps scared of judgment, of fear, of bias, or any of those things. So I think doing that as a people person or a leader who is leading the people function is very, very important in today's time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Gopi, if I may come to you.
Certainly. So I'll pick up from those two very interesting perspectives and reiterate that, yes, being an ostrich burying her head in the sand is not the way to go. The first step in riding biases strongly away is to acknowledge that they exist and then tackle them and the associated behaviors absolutely head on, right? So we need to we need to stop ourselves from being bothered by these, but understand that this could actually be a genuine blind spot for people, right? Regardless of gender. So hence, subtle and sometimes, well, not so subtle calling out of such prejudiced behaviors can fix them forever. And this has personally worked for me.
Okay, so I like the word blind spot. I'm going to pick that up later, but I'm going to first come to Shayantani. That gives me a very, very good idea. Thank you, Gopi. Shayantani, let's come to you.
So Aniruddha, I'm going to take a step back. So I know we are talking about bias, but bias, the way I see it, is it's a rigorous part of the cultural and the social process, right? I would not go and blame somebody for it because there's been huge amount of conditioning over the generations. So my approach has always been, so we all understand discrimination. So obviously when there's a discrimination, you do something about it. But I have always been very sensitive to subtle biases, right, at the office spaces. And that's what I use a term very frequently. Typically, and again, it is not about a woman or it is not about the gender or anything else. Whenever you treat somebody differentially in a gray area. So for example, let's say somebody telling, let's say a female employee, you cannot do this task because I value your family more. You need to spend time with your family more. That is where is a grayness. You confuse the person. They do not know if it is their competence or is it the environment? So I always, whenever I coach my teams, my leader, I said, look out for this because subtle biases can be very depleting, cognitively, emotionally, very depleting. So that is usually my focus area. And I'm going to borrow a term from what I think Nidhi said, without a vengeance. I think that is something I do follow, because somebody would say, hey, you're always complaining. But no, I think I would always speak out and say, this is what we need to do, right?
Wonderful, Shayantani. You have also given me a great cue. And let's see, how much of time permits. But I'm going to sort of, jump in and not lose these cues. So I'm going to pick up that cue that Gopi gave of that blind spot, and I'm going to go into research, right? Now, it is very interesting that 50% of men, okay, who work in organizations, they actually believe that women are very well represented in organizations, right? And I haven't completed my question. So the one part of the question which I'm adding, taking the cue from Gopi, is that a blind spot? And, it's very interesting that the reality is 90% of senior positions, we do not actually find women, right? So my question is, do organizations, and each of you work for large organizations, right? Global brands. You know, do organizations have a responsibility? And, you know, given that you've also moved around a bit, you know, what has been your observations, right, around this? So, you know, let's just begin in any order. Maybe I begin with you, Gopi, this time.
Well, yes, I mean, that could potentially be a blind spot for a lot of people where they genuinely feel that, you know, it is a fair world out there. So that's perfectly, you know, that is, you know, we can assume that to be true. But you know, it doesn't mean that women can't be themselves. You know, it doesn't mean that we need to, you know, mimic how men are out there in the industry. You know, my take on it would be comfortable in your own skin, enhance your strengths, don't try to be someone else, enjoy the ride against the flow. People will get used to it, you know, sooner or later. And for all the future women out there, I think don't be shy or scared. Just ask for help, celebrate yourself, your successes, failures, the entire journey, and call out whatever makes you uncomfortable. And when you get there, please turn around and, you know, give another woman your hand to help her take the lead. That's how we can make a difference, I feel.
All right, thank you. Shayantani, if I were to come to you, you know, in the context of, you know, organizations, do they have a responsibility at all? You know, from an HR perspective, given my background, although now I currently do only business development, having made a switch to business development after a 27-year-old HR career. You know, there is another research which says that whenever there have been more than 2 women in the panel, as well as in the final shortlist of candidates, the propensity and the probability of women getting selected on merit is far, far higher. So do organizations have a responsibility? I can see Nidhi nodding her head, very passionate HR. These are typical HR thinking. So I'm going to come to Nidhi after this.
I'm going to the piece of data you spoke about, right? Is it a blind spot? And I will always say the devil is in the details, right? At times, what happens? I do my HR dashboard, look at it overall. Oh, great, we are looking at the percentage. Drill down, right? Look at the different business areas. Where are you finding the women? So that, of course, gives you a trend. And I think that puts additional responsibility on the HR, whoever, the trust, the CEO, whoever manages the entry and the exit points of each level, each segment. Are you getting a 50% everywhere? And like I said, devil in the details. You will find where, if you're going wrong, you would know where you are going wrong. And that is where, you know, data leads you everywhere. You will know whether it is only the numbers. So if I look at an org level, probably I'm doing great. Probably I'm looking at a 45% of women. And I say, hey, I'm doing great. I can do better. Probably let me go and look at technology. Let me go and look at finance. Let me look at some other areas. Are we doing equally well? So that is what I would always want the organizations to focus and key matrices to manage.
Nidhi, if I may come to you.
Sure. I definitely believe that organizations and leaders hold a huge responsibility in kind of looking at these blind spots and looking at the dashboards. And like Shantani said, the devil is in the detail. It's not just looking for our numbers for a pat on the back, but it's more for doing creative, impactful work as HR professionals. It is absolutely important that you are kind of mapping your organization and how your employee life cycle works at different stages, how you onboard women, how you not just onboard women, but folks from the LGBTQ, the other folks who are coming with neurodiversity, all of that is the latest trend right now. How do you onboard them? How do you look at people in a different view? How do you create programs for them such that it becomes easy for them to come and become a part of the workforce? How do you get women who have taken breaks and bring them back to workforce? How you encourage them, how you motivate them, how you mentor and challenge them to be themselves? Because once you take a break, you almost start feeling you're not good enough. how your organization supports this through mentoring programs that you can go through your outreach or your ERG teams, how you do that in terms of developing talent across, and being very mindful that you are not letting any biases come in the way of getting in front of merit. At the same point in time, even when people are leaving, being very cognizant of why someone is leaving organizations. Is there something that you could do by creating programs around wellness, around flexibility, around ways to work, things that you would want to do to keep people in the organization? So I do believe that
Yeah, so while Nidhi is coming back, probably I can add a few pointers here, right? So I completely agree to the point that it has to start from attracting the right talent, right? And not just the attracting the right talent at the recruitment end, but also conscious effort in developing them from time to time. It's all about, the future is about skills now. How much of investment organization is actually putting on these individual developing and promoting them is also becoming vital. And more women in leadership role requires company-wide commitment for sure, driven from the top. And the managers actually have a larger responsibility here in influencing this particular area. Retention, succession, addressing the skill gap, and committing to inclusion are some of the ways organization can challenge the status quo. And the managers have to be committed to get this going. In most organizations, while women and men enter the workforce in roughly equal numbers, women actually fall behind in promotions from the very first step of the management ladder. So to promote more women leaders, organizations have to create a culture of conscious inclusion. And there is an acknowledgement across the industry around this. And I could see right from the recruitment to the succession planning to the development of talent reviews, the women talent or identifying the hypo in the space is becoming critical. And a lot of healthy discussions are actually happening around this, right? So organizations are committed to do it, and we have to just take this forward.
I think excellent points, Vijaya, because part of the question was, do organizations have a responsibility? Are they doing something? And I think the very heartening piece from what you just shared is that, yes, it has been acknowledged, it's been taken on board, and they are doing, many organizations are doing it. And why should they not, given the fact that there is enough and more data which suggests that a more level playing field will just ensure the increase in the GDP, and that's to everyone's benefit. I mean, that's to a country's benefit, that's to society's benefit. That's also directly going to impact and positively benefit the organization's bottom line. So, why are we continuing to wear blinkers in 2021? So I think, very well made point, Vijaya. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so let's moving on. I will move on to the next question. And this one, again, given the fact that we are discussing something that is, again, well known. So I'm going to pick up a few things together. So again, research has clearly evidenced that women do seek feedback, right, as often as men do. The sad part, or the unfortunate part, is that they don't get it as often. So as women and as women leaders who have really started from scratch and have made it to where you have you all had any personal experiences? And how have you sort of dealt with it, right? And why would you not get it? What exactly happens, right? So, we could start with anyone. I don't have any, particular choices. Maybe Vijay, you can give a brief start and then we'll sort of pick it up. Maybe we'll come to Gopi next.
Yep. Yeah. So according to me, feedback is a gift, right? So giving constructive, candid feedback is going to help the person grow. It helps someone to uncover their personal blind spots, be it men or women. As long as someone seeks the feedback with this understanding, it's going to be easier for the person who's giving the feedback as well. It's a giving candid feedback to anybody can be tough for managers who want to avoid conflict. And for those people, it becomes even more difficult to pass on constructive feedback to women due to multiple factors, right? So including the fear of microaggressions. Right? So here is how I seek feedback. First of all, I give the confidence to the person whom I'm seeking feedback that I want to hear the opportunity area rather than what's working well. Right? So I would specifically ask, what are the 3 things that I should do differently or start doing, which I'm currently not focusing on. This helps the person giving the feedback to focus on the constructive portion of the feedback. And once I kind of receive the feedback, I genuinely thank them because that particular input is going to help me grow. And I will also get back to them after a period of time with the corrective actions taken. Right? So this will help the person also feel valued for whatever feedback they've given. Feedback is a feedback, right? So whether it's real perception or real perception, something has to be worked upon. So I think that acceptance need to be there with all of us. And if we give that equal confidence to the person who's giving the feedback to us as well, a lot of genuine candid feedbacks will come through. Right? So many times what happens is when a person gives a feedback, people get into the defensive state, right? So want to kind of explain the stance, right? So that's where the dilution happened and the real feedback is not actually coming through.
Thank you. Gopi, if I may come to you, have you had either in your personal experience or from your observations, have you seen that women not getting the same level of feedback? And if so, why so? You know, what do you think?
Very frankly, Aniruddha, I have not observed that in the feedback culture because my organization has a very open feedback culture. You know, Macquarie is, one of those equal opportunity employers that really have a level playing field for everyone. But I have definitely observed the age-old likability bias when it comes to, more difficult conversations like negotiations, where, I feel that alpha women are labeled, aggressive, difficult, whatever, bossy, intimidating, and both men and women do it, right? I've personally worked in India, I worked in London and the US, and interestingly, for a Japanese client, so across a lot of cultures, and currently with an organization which is headquartered in Australia. So I can tell you from experience, the level of patriarchy, now you could extend that to both feedback and, labeling as well. In our Asian cultures is more deeply embedded. Shayantani, you talked about it, in our cultural values, more than what is there in the West, where probably race and color are predominant, but in India, gender bias could be, the bigger concern. For myself, my leadership style is very empathetic. It is very gentle, but very, very firm. And that is sometimes misunderstood, as you would imagine, as being weak, which it absolutely isn't. In fact, the high trust, and comfort in my teams is what stands out. But very frankly, even I still hear the playing the woman card, you're too soft and emotional, you got it because you're a woman. I enjoy it now, I respond with humor, but all that and more.
Okay, I think separately outside the show, we'll figure out whether you just deal with it with humor or with humor and something else, but we'll keep that outside the show. Nidhi, if I could quickly come to you, and then, we'll have another question where I'll get Shayantani in.
Sure. I think, Aniruddha, I would say that I've been blessed working with organizations that have always had a high level of feedback culture, and I haven't really faced it myself. I think the way I have worked for me is that I've always asked for feedback, always thought that feedback is a gift. And like Vijaya said, I think if you go with the mindset, with the growth mindset of really wanting to learn and do things differently, and where the person really sees where you are coming from, you do not get defensive, you do not get judgmental when someone is giving feedback, you do not start undermining yourself when someone is giving feedback. I think that's been very helpful for me to grow. And across organizations, across cultures and regions. I think I have grown because of the feedback that I got from leaders and mentors that I've worked with. And I have been very mindful of always having and asking for feedback, not only in the function that I work for, but also with business leaders completely different from where I belong to. The other thing which I've started doing in the last few years is asking for feedback from team members who are much junior, the millennials, because you get reverse mentored so beautifully, things that you have been completely, having a blind spot on, or looking, or maybe completely missing out on. They bring the perspective that you wouldn't have even imagined. So I think creating that culture of openness, providing people a safe space, being focused, and knowing that there is good in this for all of us, because if I grow, the team grows, and the team grows, I grow. So I think that has worked for me completely.
Wonderful. So I'm now going to change questions. I'm mindful of the time. I'm particularly keen to lean into your personal stories, which I'm sure would inspire, so many women who would be, viewing us today. So I'm mindful of that. But before that, I would also want to provoke. And here is a statement, and again, based on research, right, which says that men get hired and promoted on potential and a belief of what they can do or can achieve. Women, on the other hand, get hired and promoted on the evidence of what they have achieved. So I'm actually pointing all fingers at people like me, the men folks. But with that in mind, and with Gopi's broad smile, I'd still first go to Shayantani before I come to you, Gopi.
Yeah, I'm still trying to think, again, I know you had a question about the background. Can I just weave that in as well?
Sure.
Here.
Yeah.
I was brought up in a very small town of Uttar Pradesh coming up, of course, with a great education, but always the thought was of cities like Delhi and Bombay were like, oh, wow. Even when you would go on a vacation, you would look at people and say, they were something bigger. I always saw people as bigger and better. And when you finally start running into the professional life, that stays. Again, the cultural sensitization, the way you have been brought up, somebody else was always better than me, right? Hence, it took a lot, many years to work through that, saying, no, I have my own value. And I think I'm just trying to remember, probably it was Vijaya who said that, is I have my value for whoever I am, right? Rather than trying to go out and create that value in myself. So unless I'm convinced about who I am, so that is something, and I'm telling you my perspective here. I have always said, I am very, very proud of who I am. I might not be 100% in all areas. And once I've done it, and that is how I coach the younger women, most of the women I coach with, they say, first you need to be proud of who you are. And that is where the exact bias, I would say that is a bias, you start breaking that, saying, first is my value, and that is where I go over next and start creating a value for my ecosystem. If that answers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Gopi, why don't I come to you next? And, why don't you also weave in the story, which, I'm sure our viewers would love to hear. We would like to hear, the start of your journey from Ranchi to being a testing engineer to now being the technology lead for the BFSI space in Macquarie. So, along with the question, why don't you weave in the stories? Because I'm going to come to each one of them. And I think all of the women here somehow willy-nilly have not necessarily started off from the biggest towns and cities of India. So I think I'd be very keen to get stories from all of you, beginning with you, Gopi. Yeah.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about the attribution bias.
Yeah.
Because we see women as less competent than men. We don't always recognize the work that women do, right? Even when men and women are on a task together, women often get less credit for success and more blame for failure, right? We sometimes fall into the trap of thinking, and I'm quoting here, but the thinking that women's contribution are less valuable, or you get talked over, or there are studies that prove that you get more blame for failure. Let's not play the victim card, but yes, so that is more prone to self-doubt. Shayantani, you talked about it, and we are here to change that. So I was part of a huge hiring project across multiple teams quite recently, and we did two things. We took out the names from the resume to conceal the gender of the applicant. The second thing we did was we did not divulge to the panels which candidate would eventually get to sit in which team. So we got a lot more women hired than previously, probably just because the disposition was taken out, the predisposition was taken out. I guess ultimately you got to acknowledge unconscious biases and root them out consciously. That's all it takes, right? I would also say that bold and sensitive leadership flowing from the top changes it all. Our landscape at Macquarie underwent a transformational change, building an environment of more, say, diversity and equity. And there's work to be done there. And then there's work to be done at the grassroots level to ensure every people leader is again accountable for the same inclusive culture. You keep the organization fairly prejudice-free. And then you learn, you unlearn, you live. That's the richness of the perspective that life has to offer. To your question on my own story, yes, I hail from a joint business family from Ranchi, a very small town. And back then, when girls were expected to dress and behave and even feel differently. But for me, there were no boys in my generation in the family. So I grew up not knowing any biases at home. The world outside was different. It was definitely not alien, but it was different, right? And my first experience of breaking what was a perceived glass ceiling was, and that caused considerable amount of visible delight and surprise, was when I topped the state boards for my 10th, and followed by, so being the state topper, and then, getting into computer engineering from a tier 1 college. And I had started hearing statements already like, she's like a son, right? Now, why am I like a son? Why am I not the daughter that I actually am, right? So that was interesting. And then at work, I experienced bias when I started my first job, and I was assigned towards the testing project. That was the destination for fresher girls a couple of decades ago, right? Hugely open, poorly guarded bias and across the industry. So long story short, openness to opportunities, exposure to various cultures. I've spoken about, the countries that I've worked in. My very own bias, very strong one to say yes. I think honesty and most importantly, divine will at play got me the opportunities and the challenges, which were sometimes handpicked and a lot of times interventional, that got me on a journey of no looking back. And this voyage from a functional tester to someone leading a business and a strong multi-skilled cutting edge tech team across India was neither easy nor planned, frankly. It took a ton of optimism and a network of friends I could always rely on. Sometimes the pressure of being that role model for others who I couldn't afford to let down. And then, of course, most importantly, grace and blessings.
Absolutely wonderful, Gopi. I think the bottom line that I took away from what you said was, I think above all, your willpower and the determination to succeed. Yes, you might have, built your networks, got some sponsors along the way, probably had good teams to lead, made certain right choices. But, some of those things happen when you believe in yourself and when you put in that hard work. So, I mean, my takeaway from what I heard, the underpinning of all that you said, I think is hard work, determination to succeed, and optimism, a belief in your own ability. So thank you very much for sharing. Prasanna, sorry, Vijaya, apologies. I think you also started life from a fairly small town, maybe a town that could be arguably even smaller than Ranchi. So, I'm sure the audience would want to hear, your story as well. So I'm coming next to you, Vijaya.
Sure, Aniruddha. Yeah, so I was brought up, my schooling was in Tanjore, which is a tier 2 city or a town in the Tamil Nadu, in the southern part of Tamil Nadu. So we those days we weren't getting so much of exposure. We were not getting so much of exposure as today's kids are getting. And I grew up in a very orthodox family, only child from my parents. So all the protection was there. It was always my father was actually taking me along wherever he's going. But interestingly, my father was in the transport department. He was actually a divisional manager for a transport organization, government transport organization. He used to take me along after my school to his office. I've seen him kind of managing certain tough situations with labor unions and a lot of unpredictable situations. So I think unknowingly that exposure came in and it built that never give up attitude, right? So when I moved for my engineering, so a lot of perception. There were unconscious bias against me as well, right? So I was a complete introvert. I won't speak a lot, right? So when I was actually taken for the engineering counseling, someone in the counseling hall was asking questions. So I was just thinking what to respond. They said, it's okay, you can respond in Tamil, right? So somewhere the person thought I was not able to converse in English, right? So so that was I mean, a lot of incidences like this actually was there to kind of just build that and break this bias, right? So I think at every stage of my career as well, someone had the confidence and gave the opportunity, right? So where only men could actually do it, right? So probably during my initial year of my career, I was designated to take care an Oracle database system. So normally it demands you to be on toes, right? So if something goes wrong, middle of the night, we'll get a call and have to attend it, right? So we have to actually go across the location, manage the servers. So 21, 22 years when you're just beginning the career, right? So someone actually had that confidence and gave that responsibility, and it actually made make me think about what could potentially go wrong in any situation, right? So that was I'm thankful for that particular organization and the leaders who have that confidence. And then in the previous organization, I was also given an opportunity to kind of set up the offshore location for the organization, and got a chance to kind of grow the location from 25 members to 1,700 in 4 or 5 years. So someone had the confidence on me and gave that opportunity. I think the opportunities are plenty. The only request or the suggestion that I would place for all the women out there is grab the opportunity, be who you are. Every person has the potential. Don't hesitate, just go forward, put in your best, and move forward from there.
Thank you, Vijaya. I mean, absolutely inspirational. I think I have to admit, absolutely inspirational. My two takeaways is one, of course, like you mentioned, you used to accompany your father. You saw many tough situations, so you got exposure, right, early in life. And then in, very, very early, you mentioned you were given tough roles, or you were given roles that many a time would not be allocated to women because they, probably necessitated a lot of travel. And, so therefore you've been to an extent somewhat fortunate in having been assigned those roles. But I think kudos to you that you grabbed them and you made sure that you succeeded. So thank you so much, Vijaya. Nidhi, if I may move to you. Because again, yours is also a story where you moved from a small town in Madhya Pradesh to where you currently are. So interesting to hear that as well.
Sure, Aniruddha. I would point out 4 such defining moments for me from the point that I was a child to who I am right now, and various people and family who have really contributed and supported me in that journey. I think the first point came in when I was possibly in my 7th or 8th standard. I wanted to play sports that typically men play. And just to, let you know, Aniruddha, I'm not at all 6-feeter. I'm hardly 5 foot, nothing. But I have played basketball at state level, and so as also table tennis. I would think that I got the courage and the confidence and the support from my grandma who was an amazing, talented person. She would take me to my, practice for sports and be there with me. Both my parents were working, and I got the support that I needed from her and the confidence. The second point in time was when I decided to move out of Sagar and carve out a niche for myself and join Lady Shri Ram College for Women at Delhi. My parents were not even in the country. I decided to go with a family member and an elder who gracefully decided to support me. I couldn't make it to LSR because of my marks, but that taught me how to be resourceful. That taught me how to look at other avenues of getting into the admissions, race that I wanted to. And I figured I could get into with the sports quota. So I leveraged that completely to my advantage. The third point in time is when I joined in one of the manufacturing setups where I had the opportunity to get a job. I was waiting to get my offer after having completed like 8 or 9 rounds of interviews. And all of a sudden, I figured that someone with much more connections and power was having their daughter come in for a similar position and interview. And I think I literally stood for myself and had the courage after having waited for about 1.5 hours and going to that senior VP. I would have been hardly maybe 6 months of experience at that point in time, and going and telling this gentleman, saying, I'm absolutely fine. I know what's happening here. I can sense it, but I'll leave the decision and the choice to you, because if you do not hire me, the loss is yours and not mine. And I did not get the offer at that day. I came back home and I narrated my story to my parents, who were completely appalled, and they're like, are you crazy or something? And then after 15 days, I did get that offer and continued to be with that organization as a management trainee for about a year, and then as an assistant manager. And then as I progressed, moving on to a role in another IT organization where I was offered much lesser salary for whatever reason, whether it was a bias of me not having been an exceller or not working or studying in a large institute, coming from a small town, whatever that may be, getting an offer equivalent to someone who just passes out of a well-known institute just because of the institute's pedigree. And I again took up the role because I wanted to, but I did tell the leaders that I'm taking it on at a lesser salary, and I know it, but I would want you to look at it after 6 months based on my contribution. And very much so, after 6 months, I got promoted, got a hike. After some point, I was leading the function. So I think ultimately it goes to where you stand for, what you stand for, your intent, your confidence. The fourth one is when I moved, there's a lot of bias and thought and people asking, why would you move to Singapore taking up a role, which is an Asia Pacific role, when I was 7 months pregnant? People were like, you would typically come back home and be with your family. And I knew the role was either had to be based out of Singapore or China. If I didn't do it now, I would never do it. And I would just get complacent. So it is almost kind of a defining movement where I say I would go there. I did not know how, where will I deliver my child, who would be my doctor, but having that courage, the determination and the force and the support, I'm sure, of the family and your leaders to kind of go do that. And then coming back from Singapore, when you had the coveted P1 visa, which people don't easily get, just because I wanted to make the choice of being with my husband and my family being together. So I think ultimately the things that have worked for me, and I would really urge all women to look at it that way, is one, where you're coming from, what's your intent, your confidence in yourself, looking for feedback, focusing on self-awareness, doing things differently, perseverance and grit, and above all, never let go attitude. I think that is what is defined. And I think I always tell my daughter, you have to be a sports person. There cannot be anything else but sports that teaches you beautifully. Thanks, Aniruddha.
Thank you very, very much, Nidhi. I mean, so many points you made that I think, I would be challenged to sum it up, but, they all resonate in my head at this point in time. Thank you very, very much. A very, very inspiring story. One of the things that stood out for me was how bold you were and how you were able to exercise those difficult choices, no matter what the circumstances. And in several situations, so-called taking the bull by its horns. Yeah, so I think some of those definitely did resonate with me. There were several other sub-points and sub-themes, but again, just being conscious of the time. Shayantani, if I may come to you, because again, you too also did not start from such a big city.
Allahabad, a small city.
Well, not so small.
Yeah, it is more famous of famous names. But again, like I said, it was a very small city growing up. And I think that works on confidence. So again, being the only child, there was no discrimination, no bias at home. Very, very proud to be the only daughter, And so many years ago, it was a conscious choice. I remember my father, what he said is made a conscious choice to have only one child, and that too a daughter. Right. But coming up, I want to say what worked for me. I got married very early, 20. So it was just being a graduate and being married. So the next 15 years for me was literally, studying, bringing up the family and growing professionally. One of the most interesting things my first ever ex-boss said, when I went for the interview, says, well, all what you know is good English. I studied from a good convent. So he's again good friends and we talk. He said, yeah, from good English to today, there has been a long journey. And when I look back, what has worked for me is, Aniruddha, I never said no to work because I was growing up on the way. Every learning opportunity, I just took them up, and we say literally my daughter and I grew up together. Right. So it was a learning experience personally, and I applied whatever I learned at home and office and whatever I did, the crisis management, everything came together. But what works for everybody, and that's what when I coach is, do not say no to new work which is coming in, because you learn, you do not know. And I think I was very lucky to get people who allowed me to make mistakes. I made mistakes, I learned, I did them again. I think for me, that has been a very, very tested piece. Again, going back, I think someone mentioned how the family shapes you. And I really need to tell you this. Before my father died, he always said, everybody tells me, you're almost like a son. And that hurts me. I said, I'm not like a son, I'm like a daughter. When my father passed away, he always said, you will do my last rites. So I carried him on my shoulder. I did the entire process. My father being a kind of celebrity, it was in the news. And I was like, it was my father, I did it. So I think the robustness of fighting odds, fighting against challenging dogmas, it just sits there inside me somewhere. So I go back to those subtle biases we spoke about earlier. It comes very naturally to me saying, no, this is not the right way to do. I think the upbringing has kind of shaped, those are the small town values which has shaped me to who I am today.
Absolutely wonderful, Shayantani. I think each one of your stories have been so inspiring that it is not funny. And in fact, while I do have still, a battery of questions, right? Just addressing and, having you, address the audience on all those questions, which are all research-based, which are all well-known, in a sense appears, much smaller. Each of you through your journeys, what you've accomplished, what you've faced, what you've overcome, and what you've demonstrated, I think is just simply phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And it's wonderful, Shayantani, that you've acknowledged the role of the family. And just if I, without getting into gender stereotypes, I'm not particularly sure whether so many men in a just reverse situation would acknowledge the role of the family, right? I see Gopi smiling. So clearly, something there resonates. Even Nidhi is vigorously nodding. So I think, listen, I think we have to be fair. We have to admit that, men and women, just in terms of genders, we are a little different. But indeed, it is rather sad that even in 2021, we are still fighting some of these battles. So I think it's been an absolutely wonderful session. Thank you all so very much. I know we had, a battery of questions to cover, but like I said, just not just being conscious of the time, but, those are things that all of us read day in and day out. Even, those who are watching us, viewing us, they can Google it and they would know all about all those things about which women do get discriminated on a day in and day out basis. I think it's been your stories which have been truly inspirational, is going to inspire the next generation of women leaders. And to all of you and to our audience, I would say all power to women and women leaders of the future. So, thank you all very much. My name is Aniruddha. I did not introduce myself earlier. I am the business development chief or head for WiT-ACE. I have a 27-year-old HR career prior to that. I'm a pass out of TISS 1992. But that apart, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with all of you. Thank you all very, very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aniruddha.
Thank you so
You've
much,
been an
Aniruddha.
awesome host and really enjoyed a lot.
Thank you
Absolutely.
very much. Absolutely.
Thank you for
having
Absolutely
us
my
here.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a wonderful
Thank you
day.
so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Sure.